Hello, I'm Andy Johnson. Welcome once again to this other episode in the series, Shepherd's Corner. We're looking at the role of the church in many manifestations of life. In this program, we want to look at the role and function of the church as it relates to science and technology. Again, Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon, our continuing guest. Good to have you once again, sir.
Good to be here with you.
How are you?
Doing good, you know.
Yeah.
Easter has been great, and post-Easter, we will have lots of activities, but life has been great.
Yeah, life is good. All right, so if we start with this, let me tell you, when I was younger, much younger, and there was this magazine with the newspaper. It was one of the top newspapers in the United States called the Christian Science Monitor.
Yes.
And that led into discussions about the question of Christianity and science. Some people say the two shouldn't mesh. As a broad opening statement, what's the position of the church, and how that position may have evolved over the last few decades, especially faith and science?
We've moved a long way away from Galileo.
Yeah.
where we threatened to burn the poor guy at the stake because he made comments about the earth, the moon, the sun,
universe,
and how the earth was not the center of the universe, but it was really the sun.
Yes.
So we moved a long way away from that. But, science would not evolve the way it did without Christianity, and Christianity would not have evolved the way it has without science. And so many people see the opposition between science and faith. In fact, there are some who believe you either believe Darwin or you believe creation. And I don't see it that way. I see that Darwin and creation are two narratives about the same reality from totally different perspectives. It's like two different people seeing one accident, and you could get two totally different stories out of the same episode.
Yeah, that has been proven time and again.
Yes, and so I would start by saying that there is an incredible synergy between science and technology, but they're speaking two different narratives, and they're speaking in different ways about different kinds of things.
Yeah, and so how do you sort of convince people of that, what you just said there, that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive?
So if you take creation, for instance, I remember reading Stephen Hawking's great work, A Brief History of Time. And he was honest enough to say, he came to this juncture where he had to make a choice. Either the thing always existed, or it began in a finite time. And he was there at that juncture, and he said, something? I am going with the fact that it always existed. It was always there. And he went down the road of his science, and then when he saw that the universe was expanding, when he saw different data that was coming, he realized, no, this thing wasn't always there. This thing had to begin, because if the universe is expanding, therefore it came from a point and is moving outwards. And he walked right back to that point and then agreed with the Genesis story. Now he is an atheist as you can get. So he wanted to choose the opposite position from faith. But he came back down and took the same starting point that faith would start. There was a finite moment when the whole thing began. We now call it the Big Bang.
Yes.
The challenge that most people have when they read the Genesis story and when they read Darwin, they think that we should read one like we read the other. But you don't read the front page of a newspaper the way you read the funnies or the editorial, or the crime page or the stocks and bonds page. You understand in your mind you're reading something different. And the story of the Genesis is a story written in a particular age with a particular understanding. And in that age, mythology was the most truth that you can have. And you then encoded it into story. And that story is how you contained and held truth and passed it from generation to generation.
Yeah.
Today we hear mythology and we say, oh, that's false. No, mythology is absolutely true. I mean, I always tell young people who ask me that question because of a real topic among the young people. I say, yes, but I'm sure you know the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. I say, yes. What that have to do with it? I say, well, that's mythology. Well, what that have to do with it? Well, they had a mother and a son. They had a cow. The cow could produce no milk. The boy went. He got he sold the cow. He exchanged it for magic's beans. He came back. Mom got angry, threw the beans outside, and sent him to bed without supper, and the beanstalk sprouted. Well, that's a story really about puberty and boys. That's really what the story is about. Magic seed, sprouting, overnight. Well, come on, you know. And the whole story, even in Jack and the Beanstalk story, the music, the harp that plays the sacred music, well, it's only when the boy goes to spirituality that he actually soothes that testosterone that's driving him crazy. The climbing of the beanstalk, well, every teenage boy goes climbing the beanstalk from time to time in his exploits, and that's what teenage boys do. So the whole goose that lays the golden egg, every boy has this gift that keeps on giving. And the purpose of adolescence is to discover that gift, because that's how he finds the energy to do the inner journey and to do the incredible thing that he's called to. So the story has all the complexity of adolescence outside of the language of psychology, outside of the language of biology, outside of but it's speaking to testosterone. It's speaking to adolescent development. It's speaking to everything that we now know from psychology about boys and puberty. But it was contained in a myth that when people hear that, they say, oh, you know, I used to talk about Jack and the Beanstalk, so I got to look at it differently now. But it's the same thing in the Genesis story. The story contains incredible wisdom about who we are as human beings, about who God is, and about this relationship between us and God. And this relationship between us and each other, and this relationship between us and the creation, and the relationship between us and ourselves. And these four relationships, which are unfolding in the first 3 or 4 chapters of Genesis, is really this incredible story that teaches lessons to us that are quite amazing. I mean, St. John Paul wrote Theology of the Body. It's a book this thick, 129 catecheses on the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Okay?
Wow.
Okay. So this is not, because there's a depth to the story. Now, if you go to Darwin and natural selection, on the other hand, and you look at it from that perspective, that's a different kind of story. Now that story is not asking about meaning. The Genesis story is asking about meaning. That story is asking about facts. And how do we understand the facts, the sequence of events, the linear progression? How do we understand how did we get from here to here to here in the creation story? But the Genesis story talks about stages, the 7 stages of the creation. And step by step by step. And when scientists look at it, the 7 stages as it was set out in Genesis, how many ever thousands of years ago, are the same 7 stages by which we would have expected the evolution process to go, if you look at evolution as a start. Yeah. So the 2 stories, I would say, are fruitful, both of them. They both contribute something to us as human beings. But one could tell you about facts, but the facts don't tell you about meaning. And the other one gives you a sense of purpose, meaning, and a deeper answers the deeper question of who are we? And is there a purpose for our existence? And is there something more about our existence that is important for us to understand? If you take faith away and you're left only with science, you have truth that really does not give you meaning and purpose for living. And with the faith alone, without the science, there are some bugging questions about this universe that we would never get to answer, that our mind of inquiry will want answers for. Yeah. And so both I see as real great conversations.
And I'm glad you put it in some of the way you put it. And while you were talking, I'm looking at the connection between faith, having faith in science.
Yes, but you know, people who come to me, and many times I meet first-year university students. They've just finished their first year, they come back. And they tell me, well, I'm an atheist. I say, I'm so happy to meet you. I'm dying to meet an atheist. Now, I must warn you, the last 5 have disappointed me thoroughly. when you press a little harder, what they're talking about really is being a humanist.
Yeah.
They have come, they're not sure about a transcendent faith, but they do have faith in humanity.
Yeah.
If there's no creation, why would we even go to look for laws in creation? If there was no design, no designer, no big mind, no intelligent architect, why would we look for any patterns in the creation, in the body, in anything at all? There should be, if it was all haphazard, it should all be haphazard.
Yeah.
There should be no symmetry, there should be no beauty, no architecture. The whole of creation should be a hodgepodge of haphazard things that emerge in totally different ways. Fish, so reptiles, fish, human beings, mammals, all have the same basic architecture. Why is that so? Yeah. I would expect to bump up with creatures that are totally different from how we are, and from how the rest, but the synergy between all the species speaks to a greater architecture than a haphazard bumping of molecules together that form whatever else.
There should be no two things that appear to be alike at all.
It should be totally random. If it was random, it should be absolutely random. If it's random, why is there so much synergy in the architecture between fish, humans, mammals, animals, and the like? Why? There should not be.
So are we over this argument, or sometimes it is left with each coming generation as to whether
we're not going to be over it, not for a long time. Because unfortunately, when the Great Divorce took place, and Galileo and his trial kind of was where the divorce happened. So that's kind of the beginning of modernity, if you'd like. When that happened, science took truth and religion took meaning. Yeah. And we split up the assets. So we divided up the assets of the family between the two. But we can't go much further down the road. The more people delve into the depths of science, when you get to quantum physics, for instance, then you start to see an architecture of reality that's very different, that opens to interpretations that's very different from the atomic way of seeing reality, where you could divide it up neatly and nicely. But I always say to those who come to me with the atheistic thing and say, it's far more plausible for me to believe in a designer with intelligence than for me to believe in just coincidence and atoms bumping into each other, forming what is. And the reason for that is that, when you think of the basic cell of life, the gene, yeah. the gene is we now know that. We come down to the gene. The gene has 32 letters to its alphabet. I'm using this metaphorically. Yeah. But it has a very complicated communication system. And everything that is living is based on the communication of that gene to the genes that make up that living organism. Mice, cockroaches, ants, human beings, all have the same gene. But they just communicated differently to form that as opposed to this. The pea, the rice grain, it's a different communication, all from the same thing. 32 letters in a communication system. Now, our best attempt at inventing a communication system is a computer.
Yeah.
We have 2 letters, 0 and 1. The gene has 32 letters. Now, the real question that science has avoided, and consistently avoided, is where did the gene come from? How did you get such sophisticated communication from no communication and no intelligence whatsoever? And the best say, well, there was this big cosmic soup, and in the midst of that cosmic soup, there was the absolute right conditions, and through these right conditions, maybe some lightning struck, and hocus pocus, and then the gene emerged, and a single-cell organism with genes, and from that it has grown. No. You can't do that to me, because now you start to talk worse than mythology. You start to talk hocus pocus and magic. The fact is, science cannot tell us where the gene has come from, and how non-intelligence has produced intelligence.
And you think that is what is behind what we know now as the Human Genome Project?
Well, that the gene now goes forward, and I will go to that because that is a whole other thing where science now takes this gene and starts looking forward. But to finish this, the odds of no intelligence producing something as sophisticated as a gene is 1 billion to 1. In other words, it don't make sense. The odds of an intelligent designer designing the whole thing is far better than that. And so if you start on can I prove the existence of God? I cannot. Is it more reasonable to believe that there is a God, an intelligent designer, than to believe that the whole thing just came from hocus pocus? Far more reasonable to believe that. And that's where the starting point is. So then after that, then you can build from that now to revelation and meaning that has come from through revelation, through religious experience and all the other parts of it. But yes, the gene is where a lot of the fascination of science is right now.
Yeah, and you're not worried about somebody hearing this. You just said that you can't absolutely tell people you could prove the existence of God. You're not worried about people hearing you saying that because
no, because if I told you I could absolutely prove the existence of God, then I'm speaking in a realm about something that is not particular to that realm. I could prove that this glass exists.
Yeah.
And I could prove that what is inside the glass is water made up of H2O.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of language than talking about God. Talking about God is a language, but by definition it requires faith.
Yeah.
But faith is not unreasonable. It's not irrational.
Right, that's what I want to come to.
It has to be rational. And that's why I start there. That this is far more rational to believe that there is an intelligent design, an intelligent designer to the whole thing, than to believe that it just came up by hocus pocus. And the reason why that is important is because if there was not an intelligent designer, science makes no sense. Because all the systems that Newton and Galileo and all these people find, things like gravity, that is consistent whether you're here, you're on the moon, on Pluto, where it's the laws of nature. That makes no sense if the whole thing was done by a hocus pocus evolution by chance. But the beauty, why are we able to appreciate beauty? What has that contributed to us? Where's beauty? Music.
Yeah.
Why do we do music? Art, poetry. Why are these things so important for us human beings? Because there's something more to us than the basic needs of our bodily frame, if I'd like to put it that way.
These things aren't tangible, and a lot of times what is intangible is supremely more valuable than what is tangible.
And once we overcome poverty, where do we go next? We go to beauty, we go to art, we go to music, we go to the things of the soul, if you would like. Now, why does language exist? We had to have language because when the lion was coming, I had to be able to tell you, run. So language is very functional. Music is not functional. Art is not functional. Poetry is not functional. But they are, because they're not speaking the language of science. They're speaking the language of the soul. So if I can, I'd like to put it into 3 layers. What the ancients would have called the eye of the body, the eye of the mind, and the eye of the spirit. The three layers, or the 3 eyes of reality. And science speaks to the eye of the body. It speaks to what can be empirically observed with all our senses. The mind is what sociology and psychology and all these ologies are now speaking to. And the spirit is the mysticism and contemplation and theology and philosophy and what speaks to that. And these 3 realms aren't in a vertical hierarchy because they're in a penetration. We don't get the eye of the spirit without the eye of the body. You don't get the mind without spirit and body. And so it's now understanding not mutually exclusive domains for science and for religion, but this inner penetration that we have, where we have to have deep conversations between these three realms, or these three dimensions of the human person.
That's Rampa's third eye theory.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about the question of stem cell research. And what's the church's position? Because there are moral sort of injunctions against it in some cases.
Yeah.
And that's interfering with nature.
So once we get down to this level, and we start to do this research, so the whole genetic project, the genome project, gene therapy is a big thing. And it's where the scientists are raring to go. So last year, December, scientists in China did a gene experiment on twins. And the whole scientific community is now, are we really going to mess with this? It's a big question, huh? When they found the way to create an atomic bomb, they failed to ask the next question. If we do this, what would this mean to humanity? And that means that once we leave science as unbridled inquiry, because we could do it, should we do it? You now need religion to ask the other question. The creation of a nuclear bomb, the first one, what kind of civilization is it going to produce? And how is it going to lead to a safer humanity? And we walked through that during the Cold War. And today we're still walking through that drama. And it is a drama. So because science can do something does not mean that we have the consciousness, the moral suasion, the depth of character to use that. You don't put a AK-47 in the hands of a 4-year-old and tell them it's a toy gun and go ahead and play. And that's kind of what we're doing. Huh?
Yes, well, we did that. We saw what happened with the...
We did that with the atom bomb.
Okay.
And we're doing that now with the gene project. So here's what the church has done. In 2008, the church issued a formal document on this. It's called The Dignity of the Human. And it's based on human dignity. Back to Genesis 1, because this is all anchored in how we understand the human by Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And what it comes down to is that, there are two types of genetic invasion. One type is a kind of a repair type that only deals with the person and the organ to be repaired. And that one is seen as morally right and encouraged, because it's really an extension of medicine as science. The second type, which is that one is a little different, because that one now is the type of gene intervention that passes from me right down my line. So that it really, that one goes to more eugenics. And once you go into eugenics, think of what Hitler was doing. The whole Hitler project, to have the Aryan race. You start now with an elimination of certain people, of certain types of people, certain characteristics of people, by women fancy of those who hold power, and by whatever they believe is beautiful or not. And now you that's hubris at its absolute worst. And this is Tower of Babel categories, because we start playing with the human in ways that we don't understand, even for this generation, what the consequences will be. Far less for 2 or 3 or 4 generations. And then this person has had a particular gene therapy to produce a certain kind of future. And this other person has had another one for a different kind of future. And somehow these two get together, and what comes out of that, we don't know. And so the church's position has been that if it is about repair and healing in the human being that is alive, then that's something that we explore.
And
if it is about
creating a master race,
eugenics, and passing from one generation to the next, that's something that we don't want to touch, because the consequences are too dire.
So there's test tube babies, designer babies. The church is not
in favor of those. And there's a whole lot of other things there. So even if you take fertility generally, how do you do the in vitro fertilization?
Yeah.
Well, to start with, you have to produce quite a number of eggs that are fertilized. Now, our teaching is from the moment of conception, this is a human being. So the fertilized egg is already a human being. And therefore, if you have to produce 20 or 15 eggs fertilized, hold them in certain conditions, then you choose out of this the ones that you think are the best, and then you implant that one or two or three you'd implant in the woman. One may go, you may abort another one because you only really wanted one child. Now you're dealing with abortion. And the dignity of the human being means that from the moment of conception, from the moment the egg and the sperm have come together, this is already a human being. And therefore, to house it and to dispose of it as you would like, that's where the moral boundaries are.
Yeah, and I was reading something, there's a book by a man named Michael Gazzaniga, who I've read about 3 of his books, and in this one he was talking about that, and he talked about the fact that it was St. Augustine who came up with this idea of ensoulment, and when it begins, and therefore that suggests that there's a period in life when the soul is not present yet. And I think that is, well, I concluded that it is from there you get this idea of these trimesters and when it is okay to abort. But when I put that to Archbishop, your predecessor, Harris, before, and he said, well, okay, even if that is the case, once it starts, it's a potential, and I'm against destroying potential as well. So that's something that stuck with me.
But if you take the trimester, that's as arbitrary as they get, huh? So you could abort in the first trimester, but not in the second.
Because that's when the soul begins. And
no.
That is Gazzaniga's theory and so on.
No. There was that barrier to that moment, because we had the science to be able to sustain a child in the second trimester, but not in the first.
Yeah.
So if we took the child in the second trimester, we could sustain that child and keep that child to be alive and to live, because science had progressed. So in other words, we are determining when a child becomes a child by the capacity of science to sustain its life. When the home, the natural home of that child will sustain it right through until it's born. So again, that's hubris. That's putting us and our technology as the center of the universe. No, leave the child alone. You'll find that you'll get a human being.
So that settles the argument about life begins at conception. And
that's been the teaching of the church. Right. And so go back again to Genesis, the Genesis story. They had the dirt. And God formed the dirt into the human, and then He breathed His breath in it, and it became a living being, and that's where we see the ensoulment, the breath of God on the dirt, moving what is just flesh to what is human. Now, ask me when that happens. I don't know, but here's what I do know: leave it alone, and it's human. We believe from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death, the human requires to be protected with all the dignity of a human.
Yeah. Let's come to this issue about a lot of I would say, anxiety and to some extent anticipation on the other side about end-of-life questions and science involved in that. About, there have been arguments for decades in terms of people's lives as to somebody is on life support for forever. And there are real issues as to who makes the decision and when and why it should be.
I've been involved in those decisions. Huh? So there's not theoretical. There's very hands-on practical. in the 1980s, I think it was 86 or 87, the Vatican issued a document where they laid out the framework. And basically it comes down to live or to let die. There's a difference between euthanasia, which is deliberately killing somebody, and letting somebody die in a natural way. And the difference has to do with what we'll call ordinary and extraordinary means. Yeah. So you can't deny somebody rice and food to be able to live and say, well, you know, natural selection, they were selected out, on the one hand. But on the other hand, if you have to use machinery to keep vital organs functioning, is that person really alive? Or could you just allow the person to die by pulling the plug? And that's really where the issue is at its best. So many years ago, right here in Trinidad, there was somebody who had Lou Gehrig's disease. And in Lou Gehrig's, all the functions shut down, one after the other. One after the other. And it's like a very complex system that is shutting down. And you just see the lights going off, system by system, system by system. And when it had reached to what we thought was the end, one of the family members who is in the medical profession said to me, you know, this was happening, and this decision we want to make. And I said, well, hold a second. I think what you need is a meeting with the whole family, all the key people. You need to have the doctors, and you need to have me. And you need all your key doctors and myself before you make such a decision, because people are going to second guess after the fact. So okay, so we set up that meeting. And the conversation went around. The doctor said exactly what he had done a brain scan. He had found no activity. This is so he explained the medicine, he explained the science. The family went around and they talked about what they wanted and what they felt. Some members felt, this is not daddy anymore, we should pull the plug. And other members felt, but how could we? We playing God. And so this thing went wrong. And then at the end I said, look, here's what. If there is no brain activity, then what we're doing is keeping a corpse oxygenated. We're not keeping a person alive. So the pulling of the plug or not pulling the plug is really a moot point at that stage. But this family does not have consensus yet. And I wouldn't like us to do anything unless we have consensus. So here's my proposal. I said, Doc, could you bring that machine back in a day or two and do a second scan? And we're just going to do all caution. We're just going to be as cautious as we can. And if on your second scan there is no brain activity, could we all agree at that moment that the doctor will then pull the plug, because it means that there is not a human being there, because there's no resonance. And they said yes, that we would be okay with that. And so we had a consensus. 2 days later I got a call. Come here now. So I fly into Sinclair. The doctor did the brain scan and he found brain activity. That person recovered and he lived for nearly a decade. Okay? Now, big questions, eh? Big questions. Would we have been okay if we had pulled the scan? Now, according to all the principles of the church, it would have been a morally right position. There was just something in me that had a disquiet. And part of my disquiet wasn't because of the science, it was because of the sense of meaning of the family. And because I didn't want the family tearing apart after whatever decision was taking place, with them blaming each other, because I've seen that too often. But what that says to me is something that is most amazing. That this patient had no brain activity.
For a period of time.
For a period of time. The doctor brought the scan because he believed that there was no brain activity. That's why he brought the scan. Then there was the scan, and then there was brain activity 2 days later. And from that, he regenerated it. And the doctor said this is highly irregular. Because if you get down to this, you don't come back up from that to anything that is more than vegetative.
Yeah.
So he even said, if you don't pull the plug now, what you're going to get is somebody in a vegetative state. And at that stage, I said, but we don't have the right to pull the plug.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you another example of that I heard a couple of weeks ago. But before, let's talk about faith. There was somewhere among somebody or some couple of people in that group. That's all.
Correct.
Some people will see that.
And because the whole family was a family of faith, that's why I was involved in it. And we prayed. We prayed before we met the doctor. We prayed for wisdom. We prayed that the Spirit would lead us to make the right decision. Don't ask me why I asked for the 2 extra days and the second scan. I can't answer you that, except to say to you that was just my inner from God that nudged me to go to the most cautious and to ask for a second opinion from the machine.
Yeah.
That's faith.
Yeah, right. And that is an example of when we are told that faith moves mountains.
Correct. I mean, and I've seen people go through things that doctors say are impossible. And remember that science only could tell us what science can tell us. I constantly joke and say, when it comes to the objective framework of the body, Western science is really good. When it comes to the subjective inner regions of the body, Western science is a guessing game. And Chinese medicine and Eastern medicine often works better on those things than the Western medicine does. Because the Western medicine isolates it down to one thing. The Eastern medicine takes the whole person as a whole. And again, it's 2 different perspectives. But the fact that Eastern medicine works when it should not according to Western medicine calls Western medicine into question. Because if their model is right, this other model should not be working.
So therefore, how do you, that is a response in a way, and what I'm looking for. The question to which a lot of times when matters of science and health, we can't figure it out. Sometimes there's a solution in Eastern medicine and Eastern ways of doing things.
And in faith and in prayer. I mean, I've had people come and you pray for them. And they come back and say, I went back to the doctor, and this is what the doctor said. I had a case not too long ago in a confirmation where I anointed the person, and they told me, this is my condition. And they came back to me after and said, Bishop, you anointed me on this day in this church, and here's what's happened. And as far as they and their doctor is concerned, there was a healing that has taken place through that anointing. Well, no, a healing has taken place.
Yeah.
The person believes it is because of the anointing, because in their mind, that was a moment of faith when they expressed faith for healing.
Yeah. Okay, so the example I was going to give you, a friend of mine down south, we were at a wake and we were talking some things and something like that came up, and he was saying that this is a story that a man told him himself in New York a couple of weeks ago, that he'd been brain dead for 3 years, or he'd been in a coma for 3 years, and people were considering what to do, and they were at his bedside about whether or not to pull the plug, and while they're discussing that, one of the team of doctors, he said the doctor himself didn't know what made him do that at the time. He was explaining this afterwards. But he squeezed the man's hand, and the man squeezed back. He hadn't done that in 3 years. And he told them to hold off. Let's
Don't pull the plug in. It's the same thing. Now, and that's a wonderful thing where science has its limits. So there are many books now on people who have been clinically dead. The one that I love the most was a guy who was a neurologist, and he was clinically dead. And he describes everything he remembers, and he remembers a whole lot of stuff. And he says, from my profession, I am telling you, the parts of my brain that were damaged and that had shut down, I should not be able to remember, to experience, to on and on and on. And therefore, he concluded, and he was an atheist going into this, So he comes out of this concluding that, there is something else besides this human frame. And I like to talk about it as a frame, as a scaffolding.
Yeah.
Because the frame contains something else. And it is this connection between the frame and the something else that where science and faith start the real conversation. Why is it when people are in depression, when their spirit is not right, that all sorts of other bodily ailments also are taking place? And when people's bodies are not right, their spirit is not right either. We are complex intermixture of mind, of body, of soul that works with parameters that we don't quite understand. And that's why the after-death experience of so many people now that have reported. There's a little boy who had an experience, who died. I mean, he was clinically dead. And when he came back, he was telling his parents about it. There's a movie on it and a book about all of this thing. And there was a little girl who had a similar experience. I mean, far away from each other, and she drew a painting of Jesus that she met. And when the boy saw the painting, he said, "But that's the Jesus I met too." Now how does that happen? So all I need to say is that I can't prove the existence of God. To the person who does not want to believe, they will never believe. But I can say that belief in God is not only something that is more plausible from my perspective, more reasonable. It's more rational to believe in an architect who has intelligence, and not only that, it brings a deeper sense of meaning to life, to my life, to the life of humanity, and it brings us to understand and question about who we are in a much bigger sense, and not only who we are, but why. Why do we have intelligence? Why can we hear a bird singing and smile? Why does a sunset light up our soul? Why does the rain cause a certain calming effect on us? Why is it that we want to explore even beyond the boundaries of exploration? Why we created the way we are? That is when you start understanding that there's something of a transcendence, not only outside of us, God, but that transcendence is inside of us and is pushing us to transcend the very boundaries of our human capacities to go beyond even what we think is reasonable for our own time. And that's what drives science. Is the inner transcendence that pushes science constantly to the edge.
And going, out of space, into space.
Into the new frontier. So I was going to say boldly going where no one has gone before. I'm a Trekkie. And, when very often now I tell people, I grew up with Dick Tracy, and he used to talk to his... He used to talk to his phone,
his watch,
and do all kind of things on his. And we said, but that is foolish sci-fi
we
foolishness.
used to believe it was science fiction, and now all of that.
That is science. The Apple Watch and many other smartwatches, you're talking to your watch.
Yeah.
So Dick Tracy is not that far. I mean, I'm waiting for the beam me up Scotty. I would love to be able to move from here to Barbados in the twinkle of an eye. That would just be great. But where does science come from? I believe the science comes from this inner transcendence, this incapacity of the human to be contained. Beavers have been making dams the same way forever. Bees have been making hives the same way forever and organizing themselves in the same social structure forever and ever and ever. It's only humans that transform their environment to suit what is best for us. Only humans. Only humans have found new ways of eating, new ways of living, new ways of clothing themselves, new ways. Only humans. There's no other species that does that. And that speaks to the inner transcendence. And when I speak to the inner transcendence, that's soul. That's that incredible capacity that we have for being more than this frame can ever contain from us.
And we say that the Word of God is the same as it was yesterday, today and it will be tomorrow.
Yes.
Yet there are allowances for advances in science and technology as to
Yes.
how we receive it and what we do with it.
And you know, and this is the thing with Revelation, eh? We have to remember that we can only receive according to the mindset, the capacity, the mental models that we have. And so it isn't that God changed between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It is that God had to slowly educate us, so that we could come to the place where we could receive the fullness of the revelation. Because, you know, and what is that revelation? It's about love. It's all about love. There's a scientist, Sweeney, who, when he delves down to the smallest level of matter on all kinds of ways, he says, you know, the tendency is for connection. The tendency, the innate tendency is for connection. It isn't for breaking apart. Humans are the only ones who have a tendency for the breaking apart. But the rest of creation all go to the connection. And if you understand that the whole cosmos is geared to this connection, this harmony with which we began, and that's the Genesis story. We began in harmony. Revelations will tell you we will end in harmony. But between the two is enough chaos to keep you turning. But why are we then different? Because we're the only ones who have the capacity for freedom. And that freedom is so radical, it is freedom from God. We have the capacity to be free from God. Because love requires us, if you can't love somebody with a machine gun at their head, and God doesn't love us and keeps us enslaved to loving Him. So to create a being capable of love, He created us with this capacity for even being able to reject Him. Because love requires that absolute freedom to accept or to reject. And we push away because we have that capacity to do so. Other parts of the creation don't. The dolphins don't destroy the environment. We do. The other parts of the species don't take more than they need. We do. So it is both our freedom and our transcendence that have come together that has created these beautiful cities and this incredible art that we have. But it's also creating this incredible destruction to the biosphere, to the planet, to this home, this common home that we have called Earth. And that's something that Pope Francis has been speaking to, that we don't want to hear, and that is not popular in our time. But we human beings have created a challenge for the Earth that is, and the reason why this is a moral problem is because we are handing the next generation and the generation after them a world, an Earth that is not as healthy as what we received. And that's a moral problem.
And it doesn't have to be, as you say, it's a moral problem because we have alternatives.
We can do this differently. We don't have to keep the emission gases going the way they are. We don't have to keep the carbon footprint the way it is. We could make a decision. In fact, in Paris 2015, they made a decision. And Laudato Si, which was the encyclical written by the Holy Father on the environment, really affected Paris 2015. It was a bright light of reason shed upon a most urgent moral problem, which is the Earth as our common home. He put it in language and image that changed the whole perspective. This is not about science, you know, folks. This is about our home. You don't dump garbage on your front lawn and throw cesspool everywhere. You clean your home and you keep it tidy, and the whole Earth is our common home. And we have to hand this to the next generation. And he's framed the moral argument as simply as that.
And what are some of the constraints that we must self-impose if we have to treat it, if we have to begin to pull back from this constant experiment in science and technology as it leads to potential destruction?
You know, I heard one thinker put it, what I think is the best. He said, you know, the Western world has an oil addiction. I never thought about it that way before. But it is an oil addiction. Why are we creating a problem for the Earth? It's our addiction to oil is creating it. Why are we going to war? Our addiction to oil is creating that too. Why is the Middle East in such chaos? And why is Venezuela in such chaos? Our addiction to oil is creating all of that. So the addiction to oil is creating incredible problems within the globe, within the common home, and in the pockets where oil is generated. We have to make the conscious choice to put the planet before ourselves. And that means we have to decide to cut back on some things that we're taking for granted. A simple thing like the amount of water that we use to bathe. Simple, real simple. I remember when Barack Obama was going up in his early in his thing, he said, you know, if you want to make a big impression on the environment, go to the gas station, pump up your tires, and make sure your tires are optimally pumped. And everybody laughed at him as if but he was right. Because having your tires inflated at the right level saves on gas consumption. And when you look at how many cars they have in the world, that saves on a whole lot of gas and a whole lot of CO2 emissions. We leave lights on and we use electricity and waste it. We leave our devices plugged in when it's not necessary. So water and electricity, every time we consume more than we absolutely need, we are harming this common home that we have, that we call Earth. There's a synod coming up on the Amazon, and the AEC Conference of Bishops, which spread from Nassau in the north right down to Cayenne in the south. We have three dioceses there, the three Guyanas that are all part of the Amazon, and they're part of this synod, and it's a fascinating look, because here you have the real balance. There are people, investors, who want to take the trees, and shouldn't we do so? We want to build roads and connect the countries, and is not a good for humanity. It's not progress. And then you have villages that are isolated, that have existed in a traditional way for a very long time, that want to remain that way. And then you have other villages that want technology, they want the electricity, they want the smartphones, they want internet, and they want connection. And how do we settle all of this in the name of progress? And that requires a deep sensitivity and also requires a deep listening ear. But if you understand the Amazon basin as the lungs of the world, it's the largest set of lungs that the planet has. And if you take that out, it will affect every human being living on our planet. As
they say, every ecosystem in the rest of the world.
Every ecosystem is going to get affected. And the number of intricate ecosystems there are in the Amazon, it's you know, you have to be very careful to touch it. But so you have the Chinese that have come into Suriname, for instance, and doing massive logging. And what's going to be the future of that? How sustainable is that? So the notion of a tree farm, where you have a certain acreage and you log, but every 15 years everything is replanted, so that in 15 years' time you have the same acreage that you're using and you're not going beyond that. There are other ways that we can do this. But I think, again, a misreading of the Genesis story that says, go and subdue and multiply. Yeah. Subdue the earth. And that subdue, it isn't subjugation. In fact, the two words that are used in the Aramaic or in the Hebrew really have to do with a priestly function. It's not subjugation of the earth. It's really a protection and a rendering holy to the earth. But the mistranslation to English and the way we have seen it, coupled with capitalism, have done us some damage to the way that we have treated our earth.
The earth is, was it the Lord and the fullness thereof? So we misinterpret those things. We
have misinterpreted it. You know, I've done some look at our own history here in the region, huh? And when the conquest was going on, the same way that the body of the woman was treated is the same way that the earth was treated. And there was a parallel. Wherever there was rape of the woman, there was rape of the earth. And I think the same thing is happening now. That once you take away the dignity of the human, you're going to take away the dignity of the earth at the same time. And that call to protect and nurture, which is the call from Genesis, is not being heeded. And rather than that, what we're doing is we're raping and we're plundering. And that again goes to the moral question. Science, we have the science to be able to harvest all the logs we want. We have a need for harvesting all the logs. But the question of meaning, the question of morality, the question of the good of civilization and the good of the next generation and the one after that, that's the question that science does not answer. And that's the question that we have to keep asking. Yeah. Whether it's seen as a great question, we have to ask the question.
And you said that well, the church can do more in pointing to these things, these dangers up ahead.
Of course we can do more.
Exploitation of science and technology.
Of course we can do more. You know, the Vatican has a whole department for astronomy with telescopes and so. There's also an Institute for Science and Technology in the Vatican. So the Pope is informed by some of the brightest minds. When you go back to the gene and the discovery of the gene, it was a monk and some clerics that were involved in the first gene identification and experimentation and understanding that this is something to be discovered. So the church and clerics, William of Ockham, the church and clerics have been involved in science at every level. What we need now is an understanding that we are at this very difficult point where the polar regions, the ice cap is melting at a phenomenal level. That doesn't get replaced. The sea of plastic that come together in the ocean is big enough to be to massive islands. That doesn't get replaced. That fish swallowing the plastic are mutating and are causing them to die. And other sea animals swallowing plastic, we're killing them out. Those are moral problems. And we human beings, we have a responsibility to care for this earth, the common home. And we have to do more than what we're doing right now.
Yeah, there was that experiment that I suppose you know about it, in which a triplet of boys was separated at birth because scientists want to study what would happen with them as they get older.
Yes.
And that's a real moral issue now because they're finding out what had happened with them for an experiment.
So the fact that we can do it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And that's why I start with the atomic bomb, because we can make an atomic bomb. But nobody asks the question, should we do this to win a war? And at what consequence and cost after? And that's the real question. Without morality, without faith, without an understanding of transcendence, science will take us down some very difficult roads, pushing us to the very edges of our existence. Without science, we wouldn't live in the comfort that we are, and people wouldn't be able to hear this conversation that we're having.
Yeah. That's a good place at which we have to leave it. Thank you very much, Archbishop Giles Jason Gordon. That's our program for this week. Thanks for watching. I'm Andy Johnson.